From a process perspective, if I want to change, I need to understand where I am. So what processes do I have? I need to understand what are the constraints and the requirements that drive these processes.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. Today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Anthony Langsworth. He is the Senior Principal Architect of the Platform Delivered Services for NTT Limited. So on a global level, is traveling to different countries throughout the year, obviously outside of the current COVID-19 season. But Anthony, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So what I might do is, obviously that was a very brief sort of introduction to you, but so our audience has a good grid and framework for your background and experience, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how you got your start in the BPM world, in working with process management, enterprise architecture, and I guess a brief timeline leading up to where you are today.
Sure. So I come very much from a software development background. So a lot of the process work I did early on was very much around agile and how agile software development works. Yeah. Then as I moved into solution architecture and later enterprise architecture, it was very clear that the technology and software that we were using doesn't exist within a vacuum. we very much needed process to pull that in together and to give it some context.
Right. Okay, that's great. And how did you find yourself in the role you are today? Like obviously I'd imagine you've worked in a number of different organizations. You're obviously working for NTT being an amalgamation of 31 different companies. So talk to us a bit about, I guess, where you fit into that picture and I guess what you're working on at the moment.
Sure. So NTT Limited, as you said, is an amalgamation of all the different companies that NTT used to own outside Japan. It has some larger companies in there, like the old Dimension Data organization, and all the way down to many smaller organizations. And the thing about them is that some of them have some rather mature processes. They've needed to deal in highly regulated markets or for financial or legal concerns. And some of them less so. Some of them are IT service organizations who've been quite ad hoc in how they do things. So the challenge we have now very much is how do we first understand what we have and then look to integrate or standardize.
Right. And so for those that are listening that might be from an organization that doesn't have a very, I guess, mature BPM framework or mindset, talk to us a bit about your understanding or your definition, your description, how you would describe BPM to someone that isn't too familiar with, I guess, the whole world of BPM.
Sure. I mean, BPM was about systems, and systems really compose of people, process, and tools. Those three things together. People, most people understand that. Tools, usually technology or something else. And process is about the glue that brings them together.
Right.
So in many ways, BPM is about how do we improve, measure, and deliver on that glue.
Right. Now, obviously, when talking or approaching, I mean, you may not have faced this or had this experience, but for an organisation that's looking to embark on I guess a BPM exercise, they obviously need to get that buy-in from senior management, that CXO level. What are they really looking for? Like, obviously, they want to know what's the return on investment, where's the value lie, and how long do we have to wait? Is this something that's it's a 5-year endeavour, or can we start to see some value within the next 3 to 6 months? But how would you pitch BPM to that senior management level?
Sure. So the thing about BPM is every company is actually doing it. They have processes that someone designed somewhere. The question is, was it an official process or did someone do it ad hoc? The way we normally approach it is we ask the business questions. It's like, are they failing to achieve their goals? Are their cost, time, resource use, is it predictable? If either of those two aren't positive, then BPM is one of the places that we start to look at. But the thing with BPM is as much a cultural issue as it is a process or standardization issue. Some companies have a strong culture of, no, let's write it down, let's follow the plan. Some companies have a strong culture of, yeah, whatever, it'll all be right in the end. But there's also the case that businesses are increasingly wanting to be agile. The business environment is changing, and the first step to being able to change things or improve things in a de-risked way is to understand what you have, and that's one of the places where BPM comes into play.
Right. Now, talk to us a bit about, I guess, enterprise architecture and how that and BPM work hand in hand. Is enterprise architecture part of BPM? Is BPM part of enterprise architecture? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, see, in enterprise architecture, a lot of people think of EA as people in dark rooms drawing pretty pictures, just more of them. And look, some people in the enterprise architecture fraternity tend to focus on modeling because that is an important part of the work we do. But enterprise architecture is really about executive decision support. How do we help people in large organizations? How do we help the executives make sense of what they have and improve it? Now, EA tends to have a very technology focus, but as I've already said, technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. You cannot do enterprise architecture. You cannot architect an enterprise, hence its name, without looking at how people do what they do. But the challenge is, I said, because EA has a technical background, most people don't necessarily, it's not a strength for a lot of EAs. And so I think, and if you look at modeling tools like say Archimate, it has some process tools in there, but the standard BPMN nomenclature, for example, is much more powerful. So I think over time we're going to see improvements into how EA handles process and how it integrates with the more BPM as a discipline.
Right. Now, earlier you talked about having a background in agile. Talk to us a bit about, I guess, how agile and BPM can work with one another. Obviously, there are a range of different mindsets out there. Some organizations are so focused on being on the agile path that BPM to them feels like, that's just putting the brakes on, that's just slowing us down, it's too rigid, it's too structured. We want to be agile, we want to move forward and make quick decisions. But talk to us a bit about your understanding of agile and BPM.
Sure. So when people think of agile, they usually think of a process like Scrum. It's important to realize that agile at its core has nothing to do with these common terms and methodologies like Scrum. I think the key to agile is really its principles. If you look at the Agile Manifesto, there's 4 things there, for example. But more specifically, agile at its heart has some really useful things that can apply to how we do BPMs, business process management. So things like visualize the work you do, small batch size, limit work in process. They're good general principles that anyone can apply to any process that we do. And another really good thing about agile here is that agile talks about the build, measure, learn cycle. And when we build our processes, we need to measure what the outcome is, not just the output, and continually improve and work toward that process. And Agile has some experience here in how we can manage, communicate, and ultimately, hopefully, be successful in that.
Right. So for an organisation that maybe they don't have a very robust sort of enterprise architecture, what are they missing out on? Maybe they've got something in place there, but maybe it's not very thorough, or they don't place much value on it. That they're not using it as a strategic tool. Talk to us a bit about, like, I guess, what are the areas of opportunity there for them, and I guess also the things that they're missing out on.
Once the company gets to a certain size or level of complexity, you need someone that can take a look at what you have at a high level and help translate that to the decision makers. You don't need an enterprise architecture function and start up with 5 people, right? But I mean, for example, and it comes down to culture too, and distribution of the company too. So, so you may have a company of 5,000 people, but if they're all in the one area and they're all doing things, you know, in a very culturally measured and structured way, there may be less of a need. But it comes back to many of the questions I said before. Is that do you feel there is a poor understanding of the use of the resources that you have? Do you, I mean, in NTT Limited's case, we're amalgamating many companies together, there's very much a question from management, well, how do we drive down costs? How do we integrate and standardize the offerings we have? In some areas of the business, there's very much a drive to follow regulation, like privacy, for GDPR, for CCPA. For some companies, for example, the European ones, they may not have dealt with Sarbanes-Oxley and vice versa. So there's also that legal and regulatory requirement that comes into play there as well. And enterprise architecture is an important tool to help understand that and ultimately make better decisions. And as I said before, the process modeling is one aspect of it, but a lot of it is executive decision support. A lot of it is going out to the different organizations and asking stupid questions. So what technology do you use? What processes do you use? Identifying where there are centers of excellence within the company, and then sharing that information elsewhere.
Right. Great. So obviously with a number of different companies throughout the world, 31 there with NTT, talk to us a bit about, I guess some companies would be operating at a more efficiently than others. I mean, in other conversations I've had I've spoken to like franchises and different organizations that might have 700 different storefronts and that they see what is working well for one, or it could be factories, a number of factories, and what's working well for this this one factory, and how can we sort of bring that across to this other factory? And I guess it's not as simple as flicking a switch. I mean, if an organization wants to adopt like a BPM framework, it's not going to be as simple as one day there isn't, and then the next day there is. There is a bit of that transition, but I guess what are the objections and the resistance, not just from that senior management level, but I guess having a BPM framework adopted enterprise-wide?
So the biggest issues come down to culture. Is either I'm used to doing things ad hoc, there's a perception of a loss of control. They're the two things that really happen. So the best way to usually approach this is to say, well, look, where are the problems in the enterprise? Right. Sometimes that's educating people. In fact, what you're doing is a problem, because they may not realize that. In particular, if they've been siloed or so a lot of it is documenting and evangelizing what we do. There isn't a manager on the planet that doesn't want to do things better or improve. So one is to appeal to that. Two is to understand that automation and process management is not necessarily about loss of staff. It's about doing more with what you have. Right. And last but not least, one of the goals I have is really about empowering people doing the process to improve it. Right. Yes, BPM professionals tend to have a particular discipline. We have a particular notation, and not everybody can think to that level of abstraction and think for those different, understand those different tools and think from those different perspectives. But if you can give people the context and the knowledge and the skills to manage their own process, it's almost always a better improvement. People feel sometimes, I'm not empowered, you're coming and telling me what to do. Right. Usually that's because they're really, when they mean disempowered, they usually mean siloed, or they feel like they're not given the tools to do it. So right. if as a BPM professional, a lot of what you do is education. Yes. and not just on the tooling and modeling, but also on the context that they do, and try to give them, so you aren't the only consumer of this process. Who are the people that actually benefit from it? Because sometimes that's not clear to the people who are involved.
Yeah. Okay. Now you mentioned about improvement and continuous improvement earlier on. Talk to us a bit about, I guess, the purpose behind continuous improvement, and then obviously there are some organisations out there that they've got their processes documented, and then they just sit there gathering dust for the next 5 years, and then senior management's looking at it. Well, why do we do that? It's not actually adding any value, but it won't add value unless you are making those continuous improvements, that you're actually managing it. And then there's obviously the incremental improvements, and then there's the radical innovation, where you bring together a project team together to look at a big area of opportunity where you can cut down something from 14 days down to 2 days or 2 hours or something like that. So I guess take us on a journey into the value, the importance of continuous improvement.
Yeah. So at least in the type of IT related areas that I and NTT Limited tend to work, the business environment is changing quite radically. In the last couple of years, move to cloud, IoT, various legislative efforts, GDPR, as I've already mentioned, and so on. What clients are asking you to manage, and the types of offerings that the environment produces is changing quite quickly. And there's also the same pressures that I think many businesses have is doing more with less.
Right.
So BPM is one of those areas that can help us with this. There's also a labor arbitrage, moving to lower cost areas and so on. But the thing with continual improvement is, I think it's rare that you find a business that can do the same thing as it did yesterday and expect to do the same thing tomorrow.
Right.
So really what continuous improvement is it's an umbrella term for the activities that you need to do to improve your business. I think even very traditional staid areas, like for those who are familiar with ITIL, the IT infrastructure library, even with their move from version 3 to version 4, they replaced the term process to describe repeatable things that they do with the term practice, which goes from a connotation of a rigid, controlled set of activities to something that people improve on and strive to get better. And it's also about, unlocking the intrinsic motivation that many knowledge workers have. It's if you can tell them that, look, if you have an idea of doing something better, then let's try it out. Let's do it, because ultimately, if the people who are doing it know the most about what they do, and letting them take some part in the process will give you a better outcome in the long run.
Right. And now something else you mentioned there was earlier on was about how there's, I guess, a mindset out there for some people that they are going to get replaced, especially around automation. If we automate these processes, where does my value come from? It's for some people, the knowledge in their head, that's where their value comes from. And so when you start talking about documenting that down and automating it, it's like, hang on a second, then what will I do? But talk to me a bit about, I guess, how processes actually work to empower the existing. I know you touched on it briefly before, how the goal of process is actually to help the staff, the employees to have even greater output, not to get rid of them. So take us into that a little bit further.
Yeah. So I suppose one of the things that my company and a lot of the IT service companies are doing is increasingly automate what we do. So instead of an operations engineer going to a client equipment, typing in commands to try and diagnose, they may have a set of scripts that they run automatically. The idea is you have something repeatable, something reproducible, and as I said, do things quicker. It really comes down to, once again, the usual adages. If people are required to be there doing what they do, then that means we can't replace them or can't move them on.
Yes.
It means that there's no avenues for promotion from them, for example. And once again, this comes down to a cultural thing. Some companies or countries are more inclined for individuals to hoard knowledge than to share it. But I think ultimately, people are going to be more successful if they share their information. It comes very much towards sort of a maturity curve in how people work. If people feel the only way of getting ahead is to be an expert, then I think that those people will eventually be circumvented, if you know what I mean. If you move to expert as coach, or for example, then that can be a much more fulfilling avenue. And it's funny that I feel a lot of people who feel the word, process improvement, automation, the first thing they think of, I'm going to get fired. To me, I think that's really a coming from an IT background, a software development background, where automation and improvement is what you do all the time. I mean, your job is to do this, right?
Right.
I mean, I find this almost strange. But at the same time, it's easier than anyone. It's never been easier to learn to code. And taking the initiative to do some automation or to do some process improvement here is also a way of being noticed and getting ahead. So if people are afraid of this, it's like, well, get in now before everybody else does.
Yes.
I mean, as what's the old adage? Change is an opportunity, so take advantage of it now.
Right. Now, obviously, BPM is in place to bring value, to provide value, and when a customer is interacting with the organisation, they're not generally interacting with just one department, but they're interacting across maybe a number of different departments, and so I guess that's where BPM really brings that sort of cross-functional view that is, I guess, necessary to look at when you're trying to think of it from the customer's perspective, not from the organizational chart perspective where it's department focused. But talk to us a little bit about the value in this cross-functional view, and I guess talking to people. We're going to have a range of people listening here. Some people will already know this, and some people, they'll be hearing it for the first time. But talk to us a bit about that value in that cross-functional view.
Sure. So I think, ironically, I think the scaled agile framework, SAFe, talks about this quite well. It talks about there's sort of two views of an organization. One view is a hierarchical view, the traditional org chart view. That's usually built around people of similar discipline. So you'll tend to have all your programmers report into the R&D department. You'll have all your salespeople report into the sales department, and so on. But as you rightly pointed out, that's not the structure that necessarily brings value. So, I mean, that's a second view of the organization called the network view. And that's really about whether you implicitly or explicitly bring these cross-discipline, cross-functional teams together to deliver end-to-end value to things. And once again, a lot of the agile methodology talks a lot about this and how to be successful here. The challenge for an organization in some ways is executives and management letting go a little bit. So if you're going to bring a cross-functional team together, then you as a manager don't manage everybody in that team. Some of the control that you have is delegated to that team to set that direction and to manage itself.
Yes.
It's also an adjustment for the people in that team to realize, well, my boss is not going to be telling me what to do all the time. We as a team have to do this. So it's really about the management structure moving away from a dictatorial to an outcome-driven method. It's like, this is the outcome we want you to get. We want you to onboard a client within this time, or we want you to fulfill this order with this time. This is a set of resources that you have, and the process is one part of this. How do you bring that together and document it? And once again, it depends on the culture and the maturity of the organization. Organizations where people aren't used to this cross-functional team is going to have lots of challenges. They're going to go to someone and say, how does this work? And they're going to say, I don't know, why do you care? Where for some organizations, it's going to be, sure, we have this fully documented, here's our APIs to integrate from a technology perspective, here's our training material and so on, and you're done. Realistically, you're going to get somewhere in between.
Yes,
And the thing once again goes back to the, what are the outcomes you need to achieve, and it doesn't have to be a big bang approach. It can be find small incremental improvements to things. I mean, even taking 10 days down to 9 is an improvement. The other alternatives is you find that one critical business need, find that one process where a big bang approach to that one process gives a big outcome. And then you can then evangelize that throughout the rest of the organization to realize, hey guys, when we do this, it works. I think with a lot of this, once again, agile practices can help you because they've talked about this for a long time. They talk about the idea of sometimes having a team of generalists as opposed to specialists can be very effective here.
Okay.
Not the specialists don't have a part, they do, but when you have teams solely consisting of specialists, it encourages siloing. And once again, you need these technical specialists. Please don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is you need a generalist to put things together, because the value in business is obviously connecting people as much as it is fulfilling those niche needs. So
right. Now, obviously, like at the moment, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, and obviously it's really disrupting a lot of things, especially organisations. But for some, it's wiped them out altogether. A lot of businesses are struggling at the moment, and there are some organisations that are actually thriving in the current times because it's just playing to their advantage. But talk to us a bit about how BPM and enterprise architecture can play an important role in a crisis like what we're going through at the moment.
Sure. So the first thing that happens in a crisis at the moment is management says, where am I? This is where I want to be. How do I get there? Right? And this is where something like enterprise architecture can help. Because when executives say, I need to cut costs, they need to get an accurate visibility of their environment. So if they want to say, well, of the thousands of applications that exist in a non-trivial enterprise today, if I do want to cut costs, for example, it's not just a question of getting a list of them. It's, well, which businesses are using what systems and so on.
Right.
From a process perspective, if I want to change, I need to understand where I am. So what processes do I have? I need to understand what are the constraints and the requirements that drive these processes. I need to understand what people are doing these processes and where. So if I need to shift them out of the factory into working from home, probably a poor example because factory workers working from home is somewhat challenging, but nevertheless, it's you need to understand who's doing what and where. And at the same time, if you do need to make a change to how you do business, then once again, process is an important thing that often changes. And indeed, process is one of the things that seem to be easiest to change. Because purchasing a new tool is a financial transaction. Changing software or tooling is a complicated thing that requires specialists. Changing a process is you just ask Bob to do something differently tomorrow at its simplest, most reductionist level. So understanding where you are and having a good picture of that helps propel you forward to meet the COVID-19 or whatever business environment requirement there is. So,
okay, great. Now, obviously, in a 30-minute, window, we've only got so little time that we can kind of only scrape the surface of a number of topics here. But for the people that will be listening to this, and that they've gleaned a lot from you, maybe there are some things that you're talking about that really resonate with them, with their own organisation, the organisation they're working for. So if they want to continue that learning or they want to, like obviously the internet, it's got everything out there, but sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming with all the different perspectives and opinions and ideas and stuff. But where would you point someone, or what direction would you point someone in if they wanted to learn more about BPM?
So it's funny, perhaps this is me as a software development background, but I found that a lot of BPM concepts and practices are actually present in small forms in a lot of other pieces, other disciplines around. So
Right.
the first thing I would do is whatever discipline you're in, look at the industry best practice around that. So if you're in software, look at agile. If you're enterprise architect, look at things like TOGAF. If you're an agile person, then look at tools like SAFe. And there's a lot of process information in these. It's just usually not called BPM or similar.
Right.
The next thing I would do is I would, if you do have a discipline like BPM or an EA, enterprise architect or solution architect discipline inside your organization, approach people like them, because these tend to have the cross-functional view of the organization.
Right.
So perhaps I'm a little biased, so coming from a software architecture, solution architecture background, but what in that position I found people tended to come to me to ask questions about things that I probably shouldn't have been asked, just because I'd had that said before, that cross-functional end-to-end view, and I'd also gone across the people, process, and tool perspective. Last but not least, I'd start looking at what you do yourself. I mean, if you're a manager of your teams, and if I had to change things, how confident am I in the risk of this and whether I'd continue to fulfill the requirements? So go through an exercise yourself at what you do, and see where that leads.
Great. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure the people that will get to listen to this podcast in the various forms, I'm sure they're going to glean a lot from everything that we've been talking about today. But I just want to thank you so much for joining me and sharing your knowledge here with us.
Thank you. Happy to help. And I said, my journey has been unique, and I'm sure everybody else's is. And the key is just to keep learning. So hopefully people find it useful. Thank you very much.